right, welcome to Investment Banking Insights, the only show dedicated to helping you learn both the technical and non-technical aspects of the investment banking process. My name is Alex Mason. I'm your host, and I'm here with a very special guest, Drew Pascarella. Drew has not only been one of my mentors here on the journey through the IB Immersion that he runs here at Cornell, but also has extensive investment banking experience himself. But Drew, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alex. Very excited to be here, and thanks for the kind words. Look, you're an amazing student. You've been a great TA, and I absolutely love what you're doing here. I've listened to some, not all, but some of your work, and think you're doing a great service to future IB aspirants, and happy to play a part in it.
Thank you, Drew. So really appreciate you coming on, and would love to learn just for people listening, because so many people who watch the show or listen to the show, they're new to this world, right? They're just kind of getting into it, trying to understand what this whole investment banking world is about. And I'd love to learn a little bit of your origin story, kind of where you come from. How did you get into the world of Cornell? How did you get into the world of investment banking?
Yeah, sure. I'll keep it somewhat tight, and then if there are any areas you want to probe into, happy to chat. But I grew up on Long Island, one of four. I'm the second of four kids. My folks were both teachers, so we grew up with a modest household. Went to college at James Madison University and studied computer information systems. Out of that program, I was lucky enough to land a job physically on Wall Street, working for Goldman Sachs in their IT division. So this was sort of at the time before tech was cool, and did IT work for a couple of years, and very quickly realized I loved Wall Street, and I loved sort of the pace of investment banking as an industry, and wanted to be closer to the front office than the back office where I was, and used the Johnson MBA to transition from back office to front office banking. So I had a fair amount of insight in terms of what investment banking was prior to entering the MBA program, but really needed Johnson's help in helping me transition from what I was to investment banker. So, super happy to have started my very long career now at Johnson as a student way back in the fall of 99, and was fortunate enough to make the switch. Spent 10 years at Citi in the technology, media, and telecom group before joining the finance faculty at Johnson in 2014.
Amazing. Yeah. Amazing journey there, and there's a lot to unpack there. I'm wondering if we could get into a little bit of certain parts of the story, kind of those inflection points of when you made certain decisions and how those played out. So when you were working kind of on Wall Street, Goldman Sachs, right? What was it that kind of made you think, number one, I want to go from back office to front office? What was the attraction there? And then in terms of your calculus of deciding to come to Johnson to help make that happen, as opposed to maybe another route that you could have taken, what were those decision points like?
Yeah, well, first of all, when I got to Wall Street, as a 21-year-old kid, I thought it was just about as cool as I could possibly imagine it. It was just an awesome experience to, graduate from a school in Virginia and grew up sort of in the shadow of New York as a child, and then to work, in the city in a professional job. I thought that was just the coolest thing ever. So I loved what I did, and I loved the people I worked with, and I loved the job function that I had. What really caused the sort of, the start of my thinking about, transitioning from back office to front office was, I was a well-regarded employee at Goldman, and I had annual reviews, and, generally it came up in annual reviews how much money I spent, right? And as a back office person, you're trying to manage expenses. So one of the barometers or metrics for, my role was, did I go over budget? Did I spend too much money? And that felt like a constraint. So I was, as happy as I was in the job function, I thought the better opportunity would be to be closer to where revenue was being produced. If I liked Wall Street, I needed to, get a position that was, say, more important to the organization, functionally speaking, and economically speaking. So, there were several functions. Obviously, an investment banker is a relatively narrow term in terms of what somebody does in an advisory role, but investment banking is a pretty broad, definition in terms of what a financial services firm does. So there were lots of divisions at Goldman, and I spent a fair amount of time just sort of doing informational interviews as a 22, 23-year-old, asking people what they did. What does a trader do all day? What does a salesperson do all day? What does a structured finance person do all day? What does an investment banker do all day? What does a research analyst do all day? And sort of understanding, how those roles fit into the overall organization and the capital markets at large, as well as the skill sets required to be successful. After that pretty lengthy diligence process, I wasn't really in a rush because, again, I was a young kid and I was happy with where I was. I settled on investment banking as being the best match for me. But it wasn't immediate or automatic, and it did take a fair amount of time, and I leveraged or exploited the access that I had, and as well as the sort of good nature of the people that I was working with at such a prestigious firm, to really pick their brain and understand, a lot about what they did from the inside out, and figure out whether or not, I could, with some work and some study, could be successful in that same role.
Awesome. Yeah. So you looked around, you were getting a view of the landscape, right? And especially, I know early in the career journey, that's super important because you simply just don't know what's out there. You may have an idea, but you really just need to talk to people and listen to what they tell you in terms of what they're doing, what the differences are. So when you were at Goldman, how did you kind of internally network to have those conversations, given the position that you were in, given that you were also pretty young, new in your career? Were people pretty open to chatting? How did that work? What did you do to have those conversations?
Yeah, I would say in my experience, even through today, but certainly, back in the 90s at Goldman, people were very generous with their time, and very open to the role of mentor. So all I had to do was ask. So we had the same business card, right? We had the same email address, and I was physically on the inside. Whenever I had a free moment, I would literally just cold call somebody or cold email them and say, hey, I was looking to learn a little bit more about what you did. And I'm happy to tell you as much as I can about, what's going on in the IT division at Goldman. So there was, maybe some barter going on, but, frankly, it was just asking for people's time. And I think without exception, people were extremely generous with that. So if I didn't ask, I wouldn't have had the conversations. But when I did ask, it was a unanimous yes.
Amazing. That's great that everyone was very receptive. And so in terms of coming to Johnson for business school, what did that process look like for you? And, what were things like both before you got here and after you got here?
Yeah. So, I had to think back a little bit. I applied to several schools. Johnson was one that I was fortunate enough to get into. I actually had a little bit of a quirk in my application in that I applied to go back to business school after 3 years. And was accepted into Johnson and a few other schools after 3 years. Around the time I was looking to leave, Goldman announced that they were going public, and that all of the employees, even the sort of rank and file back office employees, were capable of getting IPO shares. So I thought, I didn't have any wealth accumulated at the time, didn't have any generational wealth, and was thinking that would be a good opportunity, to collect some hopefully very valuable shares, as they turned out to be, to help me fund business school and also to sort of, help with eventual wealth creation. So I did a little bit of an about face after I announced I was leaving, and I sort of begged my job back for a year. They were gracious enough to accommodate that. And I wound up working for a fourth year, deferring my admission to Johnson and watching, one of the world's iconic financial services companies go public from the inside out, which was just a fascinating experience. So I was sort of ready to go back to business school and then hit the pause button for a year. And that really enabled me to, sort of be focused in terms of what I wanted to get out of Johnson and how I thought about the sort of business school decision at large. As I thought about the landscape of top MBA programs, Johnson, being close to New York City and being sort of a New York metro area-ish school was important. I had gone to undergrad in a more rural environment, so I was sort of interested in Ithaca as a place to study. That was attractive to me. I didn't think that, Columbia or NYU being right in the city would be a good match for me and what I was looking to do, as a student. But I knew that Johnson was, a top program for finance and specifically investment banking even back at the time. The investment banking immersion, which we'll talk all about, I'm sure, in a couple of minutes, was something that was already in place. And I was a student in the immersion when I was at Johnson. So, it was already a program that was heavily invested in experiential learning and specifically in investment banking and a readiness tool to help banking aspirates be successful. So that was obviously very attractive to me as a career switcher.
Okay. Amazing. Yeah. That sounds great that you got to witness Goldman IPO first off. Like that must have been really cool. Being employed at the firm at the time, and then you had your acceptance already. You were deferring, so you didn't really have to worry about that as much in terms of the whole application process. But then once you got to Johnson, what was the investment banking recruiting process like for you at the time, and also for your peers? What were things like? How did people typically go about recruiting? I'm just curious about some of the maybe similarities or differences between now and then.
Yeah, so I would say, by and large, it was relatively similar to today in that the elements were pretty consistent with the experience that you had. I would say it was just, in the vernacular, it was a lot more chill than maybe it is today. The number of firms that were recruiting on campus or that we had relationships was much smaller. Offers were given out later. So, we were interviewing in sort of late January, early February, whereas obviously it's now, mostly before the holidays. At least the bulk of the large firm recruiting is before the holidays. So it's much more condensed now. But the key elements of students helping students, second years, providing mentorship to first years and sort of teaching them the ropes, going down to New York and doing informational interviews, that was all the same. We didn't have, in fact, the Old Ezra Bible, which is every Johnson student is familiar with. That didn't exist in my day. In fact, when I was a first year, I created that, or at least a very early version of that, in that we were collecting in real time the questions that were being asked in interviews. And I was spitting that back out to my colleagues, my classmates at the end of the night, at least so we would have a collection of the types of questions that are being asked in investment banking interviews. Now obviously it's a key product, but the V1 was really me, collecting emails, of questions and spitting them back out, compiling and spitting them back out that night. So at least, for the next day, people would be prepared and they could at least think a little bit ahead about, answers to technical and behavioral questions.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome, Drew. Yeah. And I'm glad to know, I'm sure you're glad to know too, that tradition is still very much alive with students helping students with interviews, day of, hour of, some cases. So what was your time like? You recruited, you were successful. What was it like when you went to Citi? Can you talk about that experience when you kind of first hit the desk? You have some amazing Wall Street experience with Goldman Sachs, but now you're in the front office now, right? You're newly minted Johnson graduate. What was that experience?
So for full time or for the internship? You want to talk full time or?
Well, for let's talk about internship first, because that was your first experience.
Yeah, I would say, much of it felt very familiar in that the culture, the Wall Street culture I was quite familiar with. So I think I was comfortable in the seat physically. I also had a year of, mentorship and again, this investment banking immersion to sort of help me think and act and walk and talk like a banker. So I felt very comfortable in my seat for the summer, understanding it was a 10-week interview, understanding that I needed to perform every day. I felt very, very prepared and very confident that I'd be able to get the offer based on, my prior experience and what Johnson was able to do. So that was, a lot of pressure off in the moment, which could have been a very high pressure environment. Going into full time, again, I knew what the situation was. I knew, what to expect in terms of the environment. But rather than it be a 10-week sprint, it was a marathon at that point, right? So it was really a mindset shift of, how do I plan my day, my week, my month, my year in terms of deals I want to work on, clients I want to cover, bankers I want to work with and learn from, technical skills I want to build. How do I continue, or how do I start thinking about, building that body of work and building that experience over time. Some of it I had more control over than others. I could make deals that didn't happen, right? So the deals that I worked on were deals that came to me. But I was trying to be strategic in the moment about sort of building up that skill set. And, some days it was entirely overwhelming, and there were lots of things that were hitting me all at once that I didn't really know anything about. And more days and more and more days as the weeks and months and years went on, things were quite familiar, and I felt very much in command. And while I was still learning a ton, I felt like I was able to add a lot of value in the moment as I was, receiving that mentorship and that apprenticeship, and helping clients with their transactions.
Okay. Yeah. Amazing. I'm sure simply just being in the role, you have to learn a lot very quickly, right? And you grew over time, like you said, over months and years. When you were talking just now about strategic decisions, about your approach, what kinds of things were you thinking about? Like how were you thinking about the job, your role, your progression? What did you prioritize? Because I know not just myself, but a lot of my peers right now who are about to hit the desk full time, we're thinking about that. Like how are we going to approach this beginning part of our careers, especially in a field where a lot gets kind of put on your plate at one time and you kind of have to figure it out? What would your advice be there?
Yeah, I looked, the things that I was trying to solve for, when I was sort of creating that, that experience or creating that body of work, I was looking for mentorship. Right. So understanding that, IB really is an apprenticeship business. If you have somebody, you're looking to, as a junior investment banking associate, you're looking to be investable, right? So you're looking to be attractive to somebody who's senior, who will spend a certain amount of time with junior folks. And you want to be one of the folks that people pick up and mentor. So I was focused on looking like that, right? So being resourceful and being assertive and having a positive attitude and always willing to learn and always going the extra mile. I thought that would be a good way to present myself as investable or trainable. And then I was looking for individuals who, would take that role seriously. Fortunately, at Citi, there were many. One person in particular, a guy by the name of Mark Barber, who had just made MD when I joined, or maybe a year before, on an accelerated path too. I don't think he spent any time as a director. I think he went right from VP to MD, which is, maybe a little bit more typical than is today, but still was quite atypical. He was an outstanding investment banker and also a good human. And he and I got along quite well, and I think he was willing to mentor and invest in me, and I was willing to go the extra mile for him. So we had, a really nice bond and relationship that started pretty early. So he was, willing to take me to meetings and get me in front of clients, maybe before the average associate was at the time. Oftentimes we were working, without a VP. So there was a sort of a direct associate to MD relationship, which again is pretty rare, but really, was quite valuable and important with respect to my own, sort of training and development as a junior banker. So I was looking for that, right? I was looking to be investable, and I was looking for somebody who's going to invest in me, who I could see, sort of as a role model, not as a banker, but as a person. How do you treat people? What are your relationships with clients like? Are they truly relationships, or are they more transactional? How do you think, from an ethical perspective? How do you think from a value perspective? So, I think our systems aligned pretty well, and he was somebody that I was looking to learn from as much as possible. So, that was something that I sought out.
Amazing. Okay. So you sought out mentorship. Thankfully, you found some great ones, in particular, this new MD, Mark. And when you worked with him, Drew, what did you observe were some of his qualities, both personally and professionally, that you think separated him from some of the other investment bankers that you saw in your mind? What is it that made his behavior, attitude, etc., so great in your eyes?
So I would say he very much played the long game. So he was less interested in making sure that, he had X wallet share on a per quarter basis, and much more focused on making sure that his key clients knew that he was a value added and trusted advisor, right? And that takes time. So, being able to sort of think long run and invest the time in relationships over months and years, so that when a key transaction comes up, he's the first call. I thought he was very good at that, and taking that long view with clients sort of took the pressure off the sort of quarterly hunt for the next transaction. So I thought that was a thoughtful way to go about building his business. He was very level-headed, very cool-headed. So were many other folks. But, I'd say he was amongst the most level-headed, cool-headed senior folks in the group, and I appreciated that. That's, in line with my personality, and the volatility of somebody who gets hot, when something isn't going down is a little bit oil and water for me. So I appreciated his even keeled nature. And third, I would say he was a real strategist. He was an industry expert. He really dug in, and we covered, a pretty technical little area of TMT, which was communications technology or communications equipment. It wasn't exclusively what I covered, but we had a focus there. And he knew the products of these companies inside and out. And I had come from technology, right? I had come from actually installing this stuff and, negotiating contracts and designing networks, to use this equipment. So I thought I knew this stuff cold. And I came in with the sort of ones and zeros knowledge of an engineer. And he did not, and was just as well steeped, if not, more well steeped on the technical aspects of the products and services that his clients delivered, and sort of how the ecosystem fit together, and who did what, and who was good at what, and who had opportunities, and who was maybe falling behind. He was outstanding in that. Every banker is required to know their industry very well. But he very easily could have plugged into a senior strategy role at one of these big companies, quite seamlessly, given his body of knowledge. It was quite impressive.
Okay. No, thank you. That's really insightful, because to me, it demonstrates how it's not just enough to kind of know the investment banking kind of very tactical stuff in terms of modeling, building decks, all that stuff is great. But do you really understand the things that your client cares about?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm hearing from you with one of your key mentors. So thank you. Yeah. So as you progressed in Citi, what was that experience like for you in terms of the growth of your responsibility, the growth of your skills? Any key stories or lessons from your time there, other than kind of the early days of being mentored and getting oriented?
Yeah, I talked a lot about the sort of onboarding in first couple of years, but banking, as you very well know, Alex, banking changes, wholesale from a junior associate level to a senior sort of calling officer level. The job is almost unrecognizable between those two phases. And the way I think about it is you're sort of, when in the beginning you're almost exclusively internally facing, meaning your clients are senior bankers. You as an associate are working on behalf of senior bankers. And then as you get more senior, you start to change and pivot your orientation from internal to external. You're spending a lot less time on models, a lot less time on research, much more time, sort of understanding and covering and building relationships with clients and trying to position yourself as that trusted advisor. So those two roles are quite different. And the best investment bankers are capable of taking that, technical foundation that you build as a junior banker and translating that into the sort of building blocks of what you need to be a trusted advisor and delivering, financial advice and strategic advice to a client contextualized for the moment that they're in. So I enjoyed that journey. I thought it was fun to sort of, pivot from internal to external and slowly learn how to change my lens and who the client was and what was needed at the time and how I could add value. I was, sort of excited and challenged by that. The one piece that didn't go down or lessen over the years was the sort of intensity in the hours, right? So I spent, 80 to 100 hours in the office as a junior, and then 80 to 100 hours in the office, on planes, at home, at night and weekends, sort of thinking and working with the junior team. The commitment to the industry didn't really change over time, at least from my perspective. And I found that pretty difficult towards the end to be able to sort of maintain a life and a lifestyle, or try to build a life and a lifestyle when, of 168 hours, half to 2/3 of them are taken up with work.
Okay. Yeah. Understandable. And yeah, thanks for sharing that, just kind of getting the bigger picture view of what things could look like, moving from that junior banker to senior banker role. It sounds like it's really just the nature of the work changes and your skills change, your relationships change, but the commitment and kind of the persistence required, it's really all the same. It's just kind of changes flavor. So are there any things that you saw in terms of mistakes that other investment bankers made during your time at Citi that you would kind of warn junior bankers coming into the industry to avoid?
That's a good question. So, off the top of my head, your reputation is all you have. So thinking about you as a brand and you as a product, and being very careful about, how you act and how you interact such that your reputation is in build mode, not in tear down mode. And every decision you make, every conversation you have, every email you write, every back channel, whisper that happens on a transaction, it's all being recorded in somebody's head. And there are good people and there are less than good people. And the only way you survive in this industry, or frankly any other, is to be one of the good ones, right? And do the right thing. And even if it's hard, do the ethical thing, always tell the truth, never hide a problem, face your issues. If you make a mistake, tell somebody, even if it's a big mistake to the CEO of a major client, be honest and open and forthright, and do the right thing all the time. And those people that looked at those situations maybe more transactionally, if I say this thing today, I could maybe win the day, you're never going to win the war doing something like that. And I saw those mistakes, maybe not as much at my own firm, but I saw that, in the industry over time. And that was very obvious to me, that taking that long view and protecting and building your relationship was the number one goal of, sort of maintaining any type of industry place, that you've earned.
Yeah, well said, and totally agree. That makes sense. It's the long view that really matters. So thank you for sharing that. In terms of your career at this point, I think you've been at Citi, is it about 10 years or so?
Yep.
When you decided to transition, can you talk a little bit about that transition and how you thought about it and what you did after?
Yeah. So, I was in my MD promotion year. I was set to be promoted, and I really thought long and hard about whether or not that next chapter, as an MD, where I was, sort of officially on the hook for revenue, was something that I was interested in pursuing. I didn't think about it as a 1 year sort of, get the title and see what's next. I looked at it as sort of a 4 or 5 year commitment to, be an excellent MD the way I tried to be an excellent associate and VP and director. And when I looked inside, I didn't think that I had, the fire and the passion to do that. So I took myself out of the running and said, look, I'm not interested in staying here any longer. And no one in banking really does that. My group head at the time, thought I was sick and offered to, have me take 2 weeks off and sort of rest and rethink my position before I left it. And, I appreciated the kindness of that gesture, but my mind was already made up. I didn't really have any decision to make at that point. I was done. And I was looking to, frankly, rest at first and sort of think about what was next thereafter. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have an immediate plan when I left. All I knew I was, I had enough money in the bank. I lived very modestly. I didn't have to work, at least immediately, and I needed to rest and kind of think about what was next.
Got it. Understood. So you kind of came to that point, and then what did you? I'm assuming you did take some time and just completely rest full time for a little while at least, and then kind of how did
bankers never completely rest. So
okay.
This was right at the time of the financial crisis. So I frankly, and I think everybody had a view of why the crisis happened and maybe what could be done about it. And one of the views that I had was that financial literacy and sort of education about something as sophisticated as responsibly using credit was an area where I could personally add some value. So I partnered with a museum to build a financial literacy curriculum for 7th through 10th graders and help deliver that for the first year after I left Citi. And that was very rewarding and in some ways cathartic, in the reaction to what was going on more globally in the industry. I could say I worked hard on that. I think it was a good product, but I worked probably 1/10 as hard as I worked as a banker. So I was certainly resting, while I was doing that. And I got myself back in shape physically. I was able to sort of get my sleep under control. So I was doing things that were good for me. While I had the time. The last thing I did just to sort of fill some time, a couple of friends and I, with some family money, started what's called Pascarella Enterprises. And essentially that was an algorithmic sort of day trading activity where I was trying different strategies on trading commodities and futures. And that was interesting as well. Kind of kept my mind flexed and learned a new skill, a new outlet for some of the technical skills that I had built.
I'm sure that was interesting, especially if this was around the time of the financial crisis. Sure. Yeah. And okay, so you're keeping your mind busy. You're starting this new venture. At that point, did you think about kind of teaching long term, or was that kind of not in your mind at the time? You were still kind of on a reset mode.
I really, I would say in the back of my mind, considering my folks were both teachers, and found the career to be rewarding, and I looked up to them as kids do to good parents. I always had in the back of my mind that would be cool, but I didn't really have an outlet or a venue for that. I'd done some guest lecturing at Cornell. I was the team captain for Cornell recruiting at Citi for 8 of the 10 years that I was there. So I had sort of connectivity back to Cornell, but it was not front of mind that I would seek out a teaching position as potentially a next step. I honestly didn't know what the next step was going to be. I was happy with the rest period, but after some period of time, the rest period was coming to an end, and I needed to figure out how to be productive again on a full-time basis. And right around that time, Cornell called, and it was a cold call they made to me. I didn't reach out and say, "Hey, are you looking for an instructor?" The investment banking immersion, which I had mentioned, I had gone through it with the first iteration, academic professor by the name of Jerry Haas, who was outstanding. And then in 2002, a Wall Street exec by the name of Al Belowski took over the immersion and ran it for 11 years and did a phenomenal job with it. And he had announced that in 2012, that 2012 will be his last year. So Johnson was looking for a replacement, and they called. And it was really out of the blue, and sort of took me by surprise, to be honest. And I hadn't really thought about teaching. I hadn't really, or at least in this phase, I hadn't really thought about moving to Ithaca, moving out of my cush New York City apartment in Brooklyn Heights. I hadn't really thought about that, but they asked me to consider it, and I came up, and about a month after that initial call, I was packing the apartment and on my way up. So it all just sort of happened, non-traditionally, and like many good things in life, just sporadically.
Yeah. Sometimes the really interesting moments in life, you don't plan for them at all. They just kind of show up at your door, and you just kind of are ready for that opportunity. So that's great. I'm personally grateful that you said yes to that phone call that day. And so, you've been here at Cornell now. I mean, we're recording this in 2025, so around 13 years or so. Since you've been here. I know you've had various roles, since you've been here, but the IB immersion, leading that has been a key part for, I know what the immersion is like, but I know people watching and listening don't know what the immersion is like. Could you share a little bit about how you think about teaching investment banking to MBA students? Yeah,
sure. So, I would say I mentioned before, trying to, as a young banker or a young banking aspirant, trying to look investable, right? So trying to look to a senior mentor, like somebody that, they want to spend time with and teach along the way. And the way you look investable is to have some transaction experience and to sort of know what you're talking about and be able to sort of fumble through a deal and add some value even as a junior person. And of course, a career switcher doesn't have transaction experience because they're coming from outside of the industry. So the way I thought about and think about the IBI is I need to synthetically create transaction experience to folks who have not worked inside the industry, such that by the time they get into the industry, they look investable enough to be able to have that apprenticeship part of the industry work on their behalf. Right. So the time I'm spending with students is really to, give them that work experience that they by definition don't have as career switchers. So how do you do that? Well, you come up with hypothetical transactions that are as real as I can possibly make them, and do that over and over and over, and build on the skill set that we're learning each week, such that in January, you're pretty raw, but by May, you look and walk and talk and act just like a banker, and you have 7 to 10 transactions that you can talk about, from the inside out. And that's that sort of synthetic transaction experience. That's, in my view, what makes somebody investable, not only over the summer, but in the long run. such that they get the mentorship they need to be successful in banking at any level. So it's that sort of, the chicken and egg problem that I think we're solving by synthetically creating that transaction experience and providing, therefore, that catalyst for early success in careers.
Yeah, amazing. And yeah, for those listening, I can definitely vouch for everything that you're saying, having recently gone through it. It's, I think the really practical nature of it is what I personally found most interesting. And I think really the immersions across the MBA program at Johnson are like that. They're designed that way. I think the investment banking one in specifically, you're just kind of doing things that you've never done before and repeating, getting those reps in, as you say, Drew, so that, when you hit the desk for the summer, it's not a complete surprise. And I definitely experienced that. I got my first pitch over the summer, and I was like, oh, okay, I know what this is about. Let me just learn about the company and the industry, but I kind of know what they're asking me to do here. And I think that IB immersion experience was critical for that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's a lot of top MBA programs that have extremely well credentialed faculty members and industry executives that come into the classroom and talk about deals and talk about investment banking at a high level. And I have no doubt that helps. But what we do is really immerse the student in the role of investment banking associate, right? So there's a difference between an A-lister investment banker coming back to campus and talking about a marquee transaction and actually working for a week with 5 of your classmates on an ambiguous staffing where you don't know where to look for data. You don't know exactly the analysis that's being asked for. You sort of know the category, but you don't exactly know what you need to build. And you sort of work through that together in that ambiguous environment, and you present in a live environment at the end of that week, and you're getting, asked tough questions by me. And then at the end of the session, we're sort of talking through the situation together. I mean, there's really and then doing that over and over and over. There's no replacement for that, right? There's no way to get the students that type of granular transaction experience by having a lecture-based class or doing a couple of case studies. It's that repetition. It's the building week by week. It's the struggling in the ambiguous environment, in a structured way that I think sets us apart. And I'm pleased to say that our results over many years kind of speak for themselves in that way in terms of conversions.
Yeah, it certainly does, and it's amazing. I'm curious, from this point forward, in your career, kind of looking forward, what are some things that you're excited about, and how do you see the nature of investment banking education changing over time? What would you like to see? So
it's a really good question. I mean, in many ways, this year still feels like my first year. I still get really excited about building new cases and working with new students and seeing the light bulbs go off and sort of grinding it out with them, so that in the fall they get their internship offer. And then in the spring, they're sort of, going through the readiness for actually hitting the desk. And I still get really excited about that every year. So, next year, what's next for me? If next is more of this, I'm ecstatic. Overall at Johnson, I've been able to spread my wings a little bit. Johnson's a wonderful place to work, and provides great opportunities. So I teach in our executive MBA programs now. I teach a short class down at Cornell Tech. I teach in our Master of Science of Business Analytics program, which is my first sort of purely online class, which I just built last year. I'll be doing the second version of that this fall. That's a sort of an interesting take on this. So there are different venues or flavors of teaching, which I've been fortunate enough to be able to enjoy. As I've sort of built up my tenure at Johnson. Outside of Johnson, from time to time, I serve as an expert witness in courts, sort of helping courts better understand M&A process and valuation. So that's another great venue for the skill set that I've built. From time to time, I work and advise on transactions, so I stay fresh in that regard. So there's a lot. There's a lot that's keeping me busy and keeping me excited. But I would say the base job, which you said, leading the investment banking immersion, it still feels as fresh this year as it did the first year I was here. And I'm not I'm not being facetious by saying that. It really is true. In terms of how banking is changing and maybe the education of banking is changing, the good news is, it's obviously become a more analytical job. There's more data available. There's more work that can be done. It was always an analytical job. I think the tools are increasing precipitously in terms of the power, but it's the base job, which is delivering contextualized advice to a client that trusts you, is, that's hundreds of years old, right? And that's really not going to change. There's no AI system or software program that's going to be written to displace an M&A banker the way that you can displace, say, a trader of securities on a secondary market where you're just matching a commodity, or you're matching a buyer and seller on a commodity. This is entirely different than that. So the education of being able to teach those technical skills, be able to contextualize those technical skills, and ultimately be able to stretch a student into being able to provide contextualized advice to a client based on the analysis performed and based on the sort of knowledge of the industry that's accumulated. I think if we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to be in good shape for years to come.
Thank you for that. That's insightful, because it speaks to the core principles, right? Have not changed, are not going to change. It's just contextualizing and learning to apply the new things as the industry evolves and the world around us evolves to those principles in order to be effective, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I mean, look, you in 2025, you're expected to know more. You're expected to be more analytical and more aware than you were before the tools were available to get you up to speed, right? Full stop. Now that tools are available, you're automatically and immediately expected to be able to utilize and benefit from those tools. So in that way, the bar is increasing, right? So what's expected of you is pushing upwards. But the base job of delivering advice is age old, right? So that data and that even the context or the judgment that you can get out of an AI system is not enough to be able to provide contextualized advice to a client that trusts you, right? That base skill is still very much a human skill, and the training for that is still very much in line with sort of learning and building on those transactions, and that's what we do very well at Johnson, and I'm confident that that learning process will endure as we continue to benefit from all the technological change that's in front of us.
Yeah, absolutely, Drew. Well, as we wrap up, I just want to ask one final question. For those who are in the midst of recruiting for this profession, in the midst of recruiting for investment banking, there's one piece of advice that you could give them to help them on their journey. What would it be?
I would say be ready. Right. So, when you're in front of somebody, it's your only opportunity to make that impression. Maybe it's a first impression, maybe it's an early impression, but when you're trying to get into the industry, very busy people are going to take a small amount of time out of their day to assess/help you, and be ready for that moment. Don't get caught off guard. Understand the technical nature of the business and be able to speak the language technically, understand how the industry works, and how bankers deliver advice, understand behaviorally that, investment bankers, are trying each day to build and forge relationships with very senior executives that frankly don't have a lot of time for them. That's a very nuanced skill. So understanding how to interoperate and how to work, within a system of senior, very busy people is a skill in and of itself. Practicing that, being ready for that is all very important. I mean, I would think about recruiting as a risk mitigation exercise on behalf of the banks, right? If they make you an offer and they have you start at the firm, you're wearing their brand, and at any given day, you could screw something up and lose the firm tens or, 50 or $100 million of relationship or transaction fees. So they're very nervous about finding people that they're going to put in those seats and wear their brand. The more you look and walk and talk and think and act like an investment banker during that recruiting process, the easier that risk mitigation exercise is for the banker, the easier it is for them to sort of visualize them working with you. How do you do that? Be ready, right? Spend a lot of time preparing so that when you get those opportunities, you do look as good as they need you to look in order to say yes to you.
Amazing. Thank you for that, Drew. Great advice. Thank you again for your time today, sharing your story and your insights with us. Hope to have you back on in the future if you're open to it. But thank you again, just on a personal note, thanks for all that you've done for me. In terms of my education here at Johnson. It's been a pivotal part of it as I approach graduation in 2 weeks. So thank you. And really excited about what's going to happen next. So thanks, Drew.
Well, I'll end where I started. First of all, I appreciate you having me on. Appreciate you, having the conversation with me today. But you were an excellent student, and as a second year, leading the charge or helping lead the charge, giving back and training the first years, being a great teaching assistant for me, and invaluable resources as I helped the first years out. And doing this great service on the podcast and really trying to sort of accumulate this, this knowledge base and be able to share it with folks that were, in my shoes 25 years ago, in your shoes a couple of years ago, is invaluable. And I applaud you for what you're doing. And I thank you for all that you've done for Johnson and all that you did for me personally.
Thanks, Drew. Appreciate that. And we'll see you next time here on Investment Banking Insights.